Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your presence and welcome. We meet this morning to consider 15 pieces of legislation sponsored by senators from both sides of the aisle. I'm grateful to the sponsors of the bills on today's agenda for their work and our witnesses for being here to offer their perspectives on these proposals. Before turning to our agenda items, I want to address the recent changes being considered at the VA in regard to workforce. I think the VA needs reform. The status quo is something this committee spends its time trying to improve on. We had hearings with veteran organizations 2 weeks ago, last week, in regard to how do we make things work better. If the status quo were working, we would not have spent those 2 weeks hearing from VSOs and ways the VA needs to improve. This is not a political statement. I'm just kind of outlining where I think we are. However, changes that affect VA policy and personnel must be thoughtful, transparent, carried out in close coordination with this committee, with our colleagues and with stakeholders, including veterans and the VSOs who represent them here in Washington, D.C. I am working on legislation that would require the VA's workforce planning to follow that model, because Congress must play a significant role in strategically shaping VA workforce decisions to achieve the right outcomes for veterans and their families. I have personally conveyed this message to Secretary Collins. The Secretary has committed to me that he will testify before this committee about his plans and how he intends to eliminate waste and inefficiency and refocus resources to improve delivery of health care and benefits to veterans, and I look forward to being able to schedule that hearing. That includes making certain that the VA remains well-staffed by a quality workforce and that efforts to right-size that workforce are done in a responsible manner, and to treat the men and women who entered public service to care for veterans, many of whom themselves are veterans, with respect and gratitude. Turning to today's agenda. These bills include legislation that I've introduced: the Veterans Access Act, the Restore VA Accountability Act, Love Lives On Act, and External Provider Scheduling Act. Together, these bills will build on bipartisan successes Congress has achieved in prior years to expand access to care and benefits for veterans and survivors, remove barriers to life-saving mental health care, and root out poor performers to strengthen the VA's workforce. I look forward to hearing testimony on these and other bills on today's agenda. With that, I yield to the Senator Blumenthal, and I decided it sounded better to call him the vice chairman instead of ranking member. So I yield to the vice chairman of the committee for his opening remarks.
Whatever my title, Mr. Chairman, I thank you, and thank you for having this here. Thank you to our witnesses today. Most of you are seasoned, experienced, and dedicated civil servants, and I respect you greatly for your service, but I want to be very blunt. You are not the ones we should be hearing from today. Seated at that dais should be Secretary Collins. And I've expressed this view to my colleague and friend, Chairman Moran, and I'm glad to hear that he's in informal talks with Secretary Collins, but he should be where you are right now. So we can ask him about the chaos and confusion, the apparent malevolent, cruel, and callous actions that have been taken against the VA workforce, firing 2,400 VA employees already with dire impacts on veterans, 80,000 additional VA employees that the Secretary plans to cut. He's affirmed it in recent interviews, but not to this committee. He can talk to the press, but not us, and how this effort will effectively roll back the Pact Act that we worked so hard on a bipartisan basis to pass. The Pact Act is a linchpin of modern-day protection of veterans, and even as we speak, veterans are asking questions about whether the benefits and care of the Pact Act will be available to them because of these drastic, draconian cuts. And of course, the cancellation of hundreds of VA contracts, many of them central to patient safety, ending the research grants that in the past have proved breakthrough advancements in care for veterans and for our general population, in cardiac care, in prosthetics, in all kinds of areas where the VA has been at the cutting edge of research through these grants. To respond to these kinds of really egregious actions, I will be introducing later this week the Putting Veterans First Act. And I invite my Republican colleagues as well as Democratic senators to join in this action to protect veterans. Protect veterans. Number one, rescind all firings, all of them, of veterans that have occurred so far in any agency or branch of the federal government. Put them all back to work. Number two, all of the employees of the Veterans Administration, whether or not they are veterans, rescind their firings, put them back to work. Number three, establish a standard for any kind of termination that occurs in the future that is based on performance, not on political rhetoric or bumper slogan Musk declarations or his algorithms or AI formulas. Number three, make sure that veterans who've been offered this fork in the road, that they can terminate their decision to end their employment right up to the day that they would leave the government, because there is the vast potential for unfairness. And as to any of veterans who may be terminated at any point, give them an appeal process, an effective means of appealing any action as to them. Today's hearing would be welcome. There's some good pieces of legislation on the table. You'll be commenting on them. I've read your testimony. But business as usual won't get it at this moment in our history. The VA is in crisis. It is literally a five-alarm fire for the VA. This legislation may be well-intentioned and may have good effects, but it constitutes rearranging the chairs on the deck of the Titanic. Literally. That analogy is often overused, but in this instance, it applies perfectly. We are talking about rearranging chairs on the deck of a sinking ship, and it isn't an iceberg that's been hit. It's a torpedo from Secretary Collins, Donald Trump, and Elon Musk that has hit the VA and is sinking it purposefully, relentlessly, dangerously for our veterans. And the effects are already apparent. I'm going to ask, Mr. Chairman, that an article that appeared in the New York Times over the weekend be entered into the record.
Without objection.
This article is factual and hard-hitting. It's an account of the chaos and confusion at the VA, confirming our urgent cries to stop the bleeding. That is a quote from the VFW Commander-in-Chief, stop the bleeding. And I commend the VSOs for their leadership and their objections to what's happening at the VA. And I'm going to ask, Mr. Chairman, that excerpts from their past testimony be entered into the record.
Without objection.
Veterans have been shortchanged and systematically betrayed by these cruel cuts in staff and critical resources, resulting from the Trump-Musk-Collins anti-vet policies. It's intentional malevolence or benign neglect. Either way, we need to stop it. And that should be the purpose of our hearing today. It is the purpose of the legislation that I will introduce to stop the bleeding and sound the alarm and make sure that we preserve veterans' benefits and care as they should be. I hope my colleagues will join me in using this hearing as an opportunity to sound the alarm. We can't pretend that the bills before us meet the moment. The fact that this administration is actively undermining and rolling back a number of our recent bipartisan accomplishments, canceling or proposing to cancel contracts critical to implementation of the Dole Act or the Deborah Sampson Act, or simply firing thousands of employees critical to the basic functioning of the department, from schedulers who connect veterans to care in the community to claims staff who process Pact Act claims. We can't ignore the ongoing ship sinking right before us. And I will press for Secretary Collins to come before us and answer these questions so that veterans can hear from him directly, and so that members of our committee are given the respect that we deserve. To the VSOs on the second panel, thank you for being here. I hope your testimony today not only takes into consideration the merits of this legislation, but also the developments that are so deeply concerning. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this opportunity to speak in advance of the testimony.
I'll now introduce the first panel. Testifying today from the Department of Veterans Affairs is Mark Engelbaum, the Assistant Secretary of the Office of Human Resources and Administration. Operations, Security, and Preparedness. There was a longer line than I realized in your title. He is accompanied by Al Montoya, the Deputy Chief Operating Officer of the Veterans Health Administration, Melissa Cohen, the Acting Director, Deputy Undersecretary for Policy and Oversight at the Veterans Benefits Administration, Kenesha Britton, the Assistant Deputy Undersecretary for Field Operations at the Veterans Benefits Administration, and Kevin Friel, the Executive Director of the Pension and Fiduciary Services at the Veterans Benefits Administration. Thank you all for being here this morning, and Mr. Engelbaum, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Moran, Vice Chairman Blumenthal, and other members of the committee. Thank you for inviting us here today to present our views on bills affecting VA's programs and veterans benefits. As just mentioned, joining me today is Mr. Al Montoya, the Deputy Chief Operating Officer, Veterans Health Administration, Ms. Melissa Cohen, Acting Deputy Undersecretary for Policy and Oversight, Veterans Benefits Administration, Ms. Kenesha Britton, the Assistant Deputy Undersecretary for Field Operations, Veterans Benefits Administration, and Mr. Kevin Friel, Executive Director, Pension and Fiduciary Service of the Veterans Benefits Administration. In general, VA offers support and is appreciative of much of the proposed legislation before us today and looks forward to working with the committee to further refine and strengthen it. First, VA supports the Restore Accountability Act of 2025, subject to amendments and the availability of appropriations. The Department of Veterans Affairs Accountability and Whistleblower Protection Act of 2017 provided the VA with additional authorities to take disciplinary action against senior executives and to take adverse actions against certain VA employees.
Mr. Engelbaum, would you pull the mic closer to your...
Sorry about it. I'll tell you what. Pardon me. That explains why it was so close to me to begin with. So my apologies, Mr. Chairman.
It's a compliment. We want to hear what you have to say.
And I appreciate that, sir. Thank you. The Department of Veterans Affairs Accountability and Whistleblower Protection Act of 2017 provided VA with additional authorities to take disciplinary action against senior executives and to take adverse action against certain VA employees. Unfortunately, the VA has faced significant legal challenges implementing the Act, and we welcome the opportunity to address concerns with the Restore Accountability Act in order to mitigate litigation risk and ensure that the implementation issues of the 2000 Act do not resurface. VA strongly supports the Veterans Assuring Critical Care expansions to support Service Members Act of 2025, or the Access Act as it is known. This is a critical piece of legislation designed to enhance access to essential healthcare services for our veterans, and it aligns directly with the department's priorities. The bill would enhance VA's ability to provide timely and effective care and provide high-quality VA care both in the community and in the VA's direct care system. VA also appreciates the committee's interest and focus on helping improve VA's scheduling systems. Most importantly, this bill puts veterans first. VA supports the draft external provider scheduling program bill, but has concerns with improving the Veteran Access to Care Act and would appreciate the opportunity to work with the committee to ensure that enacted legislation does not inadvertently impede the department's ability to continue ongoing efforts to enhance our scheduling capabilities. VA also supports, with amendments and subject to the availability of appropriations, the Aviators Cancers Examination Study Act, also known as the ACES Act, the Representing VA with Accuracy Act, the Veterans Mental Health and Addiction Therapy Quality of Care Act, and the Pact Act of 2025, and Caring Survivors Act of 2025. The VA looks forward to working with the committee to amend these bills to ensure we are providing the best possible care and benefits to veterans, their families, caregivers, and survivors. VA also supports the Second Amendment Protection Act, subject to the availability of appropriations, but recommends including language that would clearly exempt an individual deemed incompetent for purposes of the VA fiduciary program from being adjudicated as a mental defective as defined by the Department of Justice. Without this clarification, veterans or survivors determined to need a fiduciary for VA purposes may face criminal liability when transferring, receiving, or possessing a firearm or ammunition. The VA also supports ensuring vet success on campus, subject to availability of appropriations, but it seeks amendment. VA would like to work with the committee to update the bill to allow benefits counseling on campus to be provided by a VA employee, such as a public contact or outreach specialist, rather than a vocational rehabilitation counselor. VA generally supports the Service Members and Veterans Empowerment and Support Act, or the SAVES Act of 2025, subject to the availability of appropriations. The SAVES Act is aligned in many ways with VA's substantial progress towards addressing military sexual trauma, providing support through advocacy, and developing targeted policies, procedures, and training initiatives. Nevertheless, as written, proposed bill language is more limiting than the VA's current regulation, which applies the use of alternative evidence to personal assault. Additionally, there are several sections of the bill that are duplicative of VA's existing efforts in the MST space. We appreciate the committee's leadership and would welcome the opportunity to collaborate on the bill. Lastly, VA is still reviewing potential impacts from the Love Lives On Act, Veteran Fraud and Reimbursement Act, and the Veteran Claims Act of 2025, and is unable to provide views at this time. On behalf of the VA and the veterans we serve, thank you for your support, and thank you again for the opportunity to discuss legislation that will improve our service to our veterans, service members, and their families. My colleagues and I would be pleased to answer any questions you or the other members of the committee may have on these vital legislative initiatives. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my statement.
Engelbaum, thank you for your statement, your testimony. Thanks for your presence. I want to talk a minute about your Love Lives On Act. I don't know whether you want to direct this, the answer to the person to answer. I'll ask this of you, Mr. Engelbaum, and you can decide who should answer. Current law prohibits surviving spouses to maintain certain benefits from VA and DOD if they remarry before the age of 55. However, in addressing this inequity, it has come to our attention that if a surviving spouse remarries before 55, it is on them, the spouse, to inform the VA so they can stop dispersing disability and indemnity compensation benefits to the survivor, and it takes the VA months or years to actually stop the payments, resulting in a debt on the survivor. That debt has to be paid back. Can you explain why this takes so long for the VA to fix this in your system, and why it's the survivor's fault that the VA is providing them with overpayments? And what outreach is the VA doing to inform survivors of current restrictions in the law if a survivor does choose to remarry before 55? It wasn't who I thought you'd choose.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question, Senator. As stated, we don't have views yet on the act itself. But as far as the existing process, when we received a notification from a spouse, we create a claim that needs to be worked, and so it's
Could you also pull the mic closer?
Sorry about
Thank
that,
you.
sir. Thank you. We create a claim that then needs to be worked, and it goes into our existing inventory. We are working on processes for process improvements to look at potential for automation of some of these claims, and as well as ability to expedite some and make sure they move faster. But as of this point, it goes into the existing backlog, and it gets worked in conjunction with all the other workload that comes in that we have responsibility for.
Let me ask a follow-up, a related question at least. Several provisions of the original Love Lives On Act, and I know you're not prepared to testify about that act, but several provisions have already been signed into law in the last Congress with the passage of the Elizabeth Dole Act. What outreach has the VA done to inform survivors of these needed education benefits they are eligible for if they do remarry? And which office within the VA is responsible for conducting this outreach to survivors in general so that they are aware of their benefits and eligibility requirements? In other words, we've made some changes in the law. Is anybody actively making certain that survivors who remarry know that they are now eligible for education benefits?
Sir, I'm not from the education. I don't know what they did as far as outreach. As far as within the DIC space, when we provide them, when they're awarded their benefit, we provide them notification that, if they remarry, that they need to provide us information. We also provide them what other potential benefits they may be entitled to. Additionally, like every 8 years, we will provide for a survivor who's under age 55, we will provide them a notification that whether or not to provide information whether or not they remarried, and then if they have, we'll take the action. If they haven't, they reply they haven't, we're good for the next 8 years.
Let me ask the question this way. Would it be true or untrue that after the passage of the Elizabeth Dole Act, that survivors are receiving any additional information from the VA than they did before?
Within my department, sir, it's not.
How about within your department?
Within my department, we have what we have in the Elizabeth Dole Act is more around the burial space. So we are not providing any additional information to survivors.
Mr. Engelbaum, anybody else on your panel for that question?
Mr. Chairman, please.
Ms. Britton?
Yes, sir. Within the field of operations, we do have a comprehensive outreach program that does include a survivors element. With those survivors outreach events, we do have benefit tables where they talk about education benefits as well as survivor benefits, and that does include those changes.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Engelbaum, I appreciate the VA's support for the Access Act and the department's suggestions for technical and clarifying changes that could make the bill stronger, better. Can you give me your commitment that you'll provide, the VA will provide technical assistance to my office following today's hearing?
Senator, absolutely. We truly appreciate the offer to do that, and we will take you up on that.
Thank you very much. Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Engelbaum, can I count on you to support the Putting Veterans First Act?
Senator, I will be happy once we see the legislation to do a thorough review along with the agency. And first and foremost, as the Secretary has stated, veterans always remain at the forefront of everything we do at the VA. It's why we exist. It's why we're here. And we will look forward to looking at that legislation.
Can you give me your reactions by the end of the week if I get you a draft?
I will definitely look at the draft, sir. I can't guarantee by the end of the week. We will definitely comment on that, sir. And
You're aware that the Secretary has said that the VA is not making decisions to illegally fire, and I emphasize illegally fired, thousands of staff and implement an ongoing hiring freeze without proper analyses. Do you have those written analyses? Can you provide them to us? We've asked for them. We've received no response.
Senator, absolutely. In fact, I'll offer today, we are in the process of doing a very thorough analysis, and Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman, I'll be happy to personally come and brief the committee on our,
Well, we want
planning process.
the documents. We've asked for the documents. You must have documents, right?
Yeah, Senator, what is happening right now, I said a lot of stuff and information has come out in the news with respect to a one-off off of a news article. So, for example, the VA's cutting
I apologize for
70,000.
interrupting you, but
Yes, sir.
my time is limited.
Yes, sir.
I'm asking for the analysis, the documents, the metrics, the methodology. There's no apparent methodology or metrics. It's by the seat of your pants, and it's illegal.
Yeah.
And I want to make clear, by the way, I'm in favor of improving the VA. Every organization can be improved. Making it better, to quote the chairman, has to be a common objective, but not with a chainsaw, not with a meat axe, with a scalpel. And I see no indication that there are written documents, because we've asked for them, or analyses, or metrics, or methodology. Can you confirm that you have them?
Senator, very clearly, yes, what is happening, to be clear, the 70,000 or 80,000 figure you see is a planning factor. We have just commenced our actual analyses. We have an ongoing analysis that's going to take place over the next 3 to 4 months that's going to do a down to the micro level examination of our entire structure, mission, management, across the board. That analysis is ongoing, and I reiterate, sir, I will be very happy to come and brief you in detail on what the VA is doing to make sure we refocus our priorities on taking care of our veterans and righting that ship that you rightly said before, I would say, is adrift.
So you fired 2,400 people without doing that analysis?
Sir, what would happen is, and I can't go into specific details because there is litigation, what happened is we released approximately 2,400 folks out of 40,000 probationary employees.
And you implemented a hiring freeze without any analysis?
In order to actually shape and prepare for what we need to do as an organization, we are preparing the way so that we can rightly reorganize and reform the department as it needs to be done. We still continue to hire 300,000 critical positions that we've identified. They are on the books. We continue to do our mission and focus on taking care of our veterans every day.
None of what you have said just now is a plan. None of it is an analysis, a methodology, a metric. And that's what we're asking you to do. Let me ask you, how many employees have been removed or resigned from the Office of General Counsel?
Senator, I'll have to take that for record. I don't have that number.
You don't have that. How about from the Equal Employment Opportunity staff?
Senator, I don't have any specific breakdown by office of specific employees. What
How
we
many
do have,
how many employees have been removed from work on human resources?
I don't have a specific breakdown by independent organization, Senator.
You have 600 to 800 exempted positions currently backlogged on OPM's list, correct?
I believe that's around 700 or so, sir. That's my understanding. I'm not sure about that.
And yet you're firing 2,400, and you have a plan, that's the word of the secretary, to fire at least 80,000.
Yeah, Senator, as I mentioned before, we are in the middle of a planning process. We are going to follow the science. We are going to reform this agency to make sure that it is focused on taking care of our veteran. You yourself mentioned, we take a look at it. We have 470,000 employees in the Department of Veterans Affairs. We've increased over 80,000 in the last 4 years. We've increased our budget by 85%. Pact Act is really important, sir. We understand that. But
Well, you're going to decimate the Pact Act if you don't have position filled for the people who process the claims. You're
Yes,
going to
sir.
have inexcusable delays. You're engaged in indiscriminately decimating that workforce. I don't know why you need the Restore Act if you're just willy-nilly firing people without a plan. Your approach seems to be fire them now, plan later.
Sir, despite the fact that we've increased by 80,000 and our budget has increased by 85,000, our inventory backlog has increased by from around 275,000 to over 935,000. Our claims processing time has increased. Our accuracy has decreased. So we've hired about 48,000, we believe, employees for the Pact Act. Sitting here today, I cannot tell you exactly, and in some areas we do know where they went. We don't know where all these employees are. We need to restore, you're right, accountability. We need to make sure that the employees that we hired are doing the valuable mission that they have been hired to do. And part of that is putting them in those very areas that you
You
mentioned.
have failed to provide this committee the documents or analysis that we've requested. You failed to do that analysis before you started firing people and freezing hiring and ending contracts, canceling them illegally. And I find that response unacceptable with all
Senator
due
Tuberville.
respect. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for being here today. Largest healthcare system in the world. My God, what a job y'all have got, right? When I first got here, first thing we did in this committee, we rehired 4,000 people that the Trump administration had fired because of cause. What did we do? We hired them back and gave them back pay. This is about the veterans. I mean, this is not about the dang workers. Now, we cherish our workers, but it's same thing here. My job is to help people, and the same thing as yours. So I'm a proud co-sponsor of Chairman Moran's Restore the Accountability Act. I mean, we got to have good people, and I know it's hard to hire people. It's really hard. I've dealt with it all my life, but we have to take care of our veterans. We could pass $1 trillion bill today, $1 trillion, and give to the VA. It'd be gone in a matter of time, and it would not help anything. It's not about money. It's about the right efforts of doing the right thing for our veterans. I've got 500,000 veterans in my state of Alabama, and it's growing. And we've got good VAs. We got some that are not so good. But thanks for trying to do this. But again, we've got to get good people in there, and I understand what we're trying to do. The VA's Inspector General recently highlighted several failures within the fiduciary program, such as millions of dollars of benefits being dispersed without oversight. Unfortunately, bad actors have found their ways to take advantage of veterans, and we have to combat fraud. I don't understand why, with all this AI now, that we don't have companies that can come in and stop a lot of this fraud. Mr. Engelbaum, do you agree with that?
Yes, Senator. I think one of the things that we're doing in our review is looking at what technology and what systems that we can actually put in place and actually reinvest to improve services to our veterans, to improve accountability. We are hampered by some of the systems that we have. In the limited time I've been with the VA, I've been talking to our employees and our folks about what they actually need to do the mission effectively. That is a big focus of what we need to do. We're not trying to recreate the past. We're trying to prepare for the future. And part of that is refocusing our efforts, as you just rightly said, and on our veteran, getting the systems that we need, and getting our focus right on that mission.
Well, I'd hope that we would look into a lot of these companies. I've had people come to me and say, Coach, we have a program right now that could save the VA $20 to $30 billion a month, but nobody will talk to us. We need to open up our eyes to this and talk to people that can help organize what the VA is doing and quit doing what we did 50 years ago. I mean, this is the 21st century. My God, we got to open our eyes. So I would hope that we would be more competent on looking at the things of the future. And again, anything that we can do to help our veterans. Are there ways that we can improve incompetency in determining the process of all this fraud that's coming in that you've seen so far? And I know you hadn't been there long.
Yes, sir. I can also
Sure.
reflect, but very quickly from my perspective, absolutely. We really need it. It's about focus. It's about getting our organization focused on the mission, streamlining it, and making sure that we're laser focused on what we need to do, and what systems we need to do, and the veterans. Look, I love the VA. I love our employees. I came out of retirement because I'm passionate about serving our veterans and improving their veterans care, but we need to do better, and we can. When we talk about, in employees, this is a failure of us as leaders to make sure that we organize properly, we are focused, and then we drive the mission to accomplish what we set out to do. Kevin, did you have some comments on that?
Yes, sir. As it relates to the incompetency decision, part of what that IG report identified 311 individuals who didn't have the right coverage or right oversight. That was because we did just that. We migrated from an old legacy system to VBMS where we have more insight, we have better control of the data. And in that migration, some of the records were lost because of bad data in the old system. We did review all 311 cases. We found no circumstances where anybody had been taken advantage of or where their funds had been misused or where there was any indication of fraud.
Thank you. Mr. Engelbaum, if I send you the names of these companies that are calling me consistently, would you follow up on that in terms of fraud, of trying to get us in the 21st century of this AI that we should be using every day, especially in the VA?
Absolutely, sir. Be happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Roanoke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this hearing. Of the number of bills that are on the agenda, 3 of them are mine, and I'm glad to say that the VA is in support of 2 of them with requests for more time for the third one. So these are the Rep VA Act, Pact Act, which VA supports, and the Veterans Fraud Reimbursement Act, which the VA says it needs more time to review, even though the VA did testify in support of this act in a House subcommittee. The thing is, Mr. Chairman, that we can have all of these bills, but if the VA doesn't have the manpower, does not have the personnel to implement the various bills that we pass, what are we doing here? And so I share the Vice Chair's concerns about what is going on with the VA. Now, we know that federal employees are being fired across the board in every department, not just in VA. Thousands of federal employees are being fired, 2,400 being fired from VA. Mr. Engelbaum, were these initial firings based on any kind of an analysis of competence? Any performance analysis that led to the firing of 2,400 people from the VA?
Senator, I can't talk to specifics on the actual analysis. One, as I mentioned earlier on, that it's subject of litigation right now.
Excuse me.
And then secondly,
you know, everybody knows that these firings were across the board, and of course it's going to lead to litigation. Do not use litigation as an excuse for coming to tell us that you can't talk about it. These were across-the-board firings of people on probationary status. It impacted not just the VA, and by the way, another 80,000 plus will be getting fired. And yes, it will. Those will lead to more litigation. President Trump issued something like 26 executive orders on day one of his administration. I would say that there were probably lawsuits filed as to every single one of these, as expected, because many of these EOs were totally illegal, but we have an administration that doesn't give a rip about the rule of law. So do not come here and tell us that you can't talk about what the basis of these firings were. I think the fact of the matter is that they were across the board. I don't know how the VA is supposed to do its job when, on the one hand, it is firing by the time you're through, the administration is through some 90, 85,000 people from the VA, and at the same time, you're trying to hire some 300,000. So on the one hand, you're letting go all these people, not based on any performance analysis, and on the other, you're trying to hire 300,000 or so people. I mean, who would want to work for any of our agencies with all this chaos going on? So, Mr. Chairman, much as I support the legislation that we have, I really wonder what is this exercise that we're undergoing here, where many of these bills, including the 3 that I introduced, all in a bipartisan way. And as I mentioned earlier, this is one of the few committees where we are able to get things done in a bipartisan way. And so I would be very supportive, except that we have an administration that doesn't seem to have its controls, hands on the levels of control, because we have an administration that is continuing to sow chaos, and litigation abounds. There are about 70 lawsuits that are ongoing and numerous judges are saying to the administration, you can't do that, and we have to have hearings on whether or not this administration intends to even follow court orders. So, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cassidy.
Thank you all. First, on a lighter note, they give us a little biography of each of you. And Ms. Britton, I see that you write poetry. I don't know if I've ever had that in somebody's kind of brief bio that they write poetry. So anyway, my mother is from South Carolina and she wrote poetry, so I feel a little connection there. Thank you. You folks commented on our Pact Act. I'll just say, as a member of the Senate, it's been very difficult sometimes to have an independent analysis of what's being done in the Veterans Administration. And this is, Senator Hirona and I have entered this as a response, as an imitation, if you will, of what MedPAC and MacPAC do, giving Congress a lot of insights into how Medicare and Medicaid work. So it's so patterned after those. In your testimony, you say that the commission could impede the VA's ability to respond quickly to address veterans' needs if it is requesting information or conducting investigations while the VA is attempting to respond to a new problem. Can you give me an example of how, could you give me this information, would impact clinical care of a patient, of a veteran?
Yes, sir. Thanks so much for that question. And I think a great example of this would be our quadrennial review process that's going on right now, which really takes a look at all of our medical centers across the country and determines where care should be.
Does the quadrennial review interrupt patient care?
It does not. It actually goes in conjunction with it, sir.
So the quadrennial review, of course, is every 4 years. But let me ask, it doesn't, what I just heard, does not interrupt your capacity to address the veteran's health care need. So why would an ongoing review looking at specific issues such as MedPAC and MacPAC do disrupt patient care? I don't follow your criticism, since you just gave me quadrennial review, which is more comprehensive and it does not interrupt.
Yeah, so I think, bottom line is that we do support this, Senator, and I think, one
Oh,
of
you
the
do,
things.
because I was under the impression that you thought that it might not.
No, yeah, we actually do support this bill, and so one of the things that we do have concerns on is that there's just a number of other initiatives that are overlapping with it, and so we just wanted to make sure that that doesn't interfere at all.
And in our vision, at least, we would be including issues not included in the quadrennial review. For example, the training of healthcare providers, which is not in the quadrennial review. So I'm glad you like it. Once you get the answer you want, you shut up. I yield.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to you and Senator Blumenthal for holding this hearing. Welcome to all of our witnesses. Mr. Engelbaum, thank you for testifying today. I have to give a shout out to Al Montoya, who led the Manchester VA Center with distinction a few years back, and it is good to see you again, and I thank you for your work. I also, look, this hearing is about legislation, and I want to talk about some of the pending bills before us, but I too want to talk about some of the Trump administration's recent actions and how they have impacted the Manchester VA and I think the system in general. Because, look, as you were discussing fraud, I couldn't help but say, but gee, the Trump administration fired the Inspector General, who's the guy in charge of rooting out fraud, right? As they fired inspector generals across government. There are 24 arbitrary firings just because people were probationary employees at the VA, not because there was any analysis of the kind of work they did or why they were hired to do what they did. I talked to a doc from the Manchester VA yesterday morning, and you know what she had to do in the middle of a really chaotic week in the Veterans Administration? She's a busy doctor. She had to send Elon Musk a list of the things she did that week. Talk about bureaucracy. So There are a lot of reasons we are concerned. I want to drill down on those with you, Mr. Engelbaum, and then I hope to get to a question about one piece of legislation. As you know, the Pact Act became law in 2022, and it greatly expanded eligibility for care and benefits for veterans who were exposed to toxins. Since it became law, more than 200,000 veterans have enrolled for VA care under the Pact Act, and more than 2.3 million Pact Act-related benefit claims have been submitted. To serve these veterans, the VA hired more than 60,000 new employees to meet the increased demand for VA care and benefits. Since President Trump has taken office, though, the VA has fired 2,400 employees and now is planning to fire 80,000 more. Not only does this contradict the clear intent of Congress, it really does a disservice to our veterans. When you fire VA employees, veterans suffer. If you fire front desk staff, veterans can't schedule appointments. If you fire maintenance and support employees, hospitals and equipment don't get cleaned. If you fire benefits administration employees, claims get delayed. So, Mr. Engelbaum, can you guarantee that if the VA fires thousands more employees, it will not take longer for veterans to get appointments and receive care?
Ma'am, that is, Senator, thank you. That is absolutely our objective.
But can you guarantee it? Are you confident now that whatever firing people with an arbitrary number out there is going to make sure you're not going to impact their care?
Yes. Thank you, Senator Hassan. We do not have an arbitrary number, as I was trying to explain. There is a planning factor out there. We have a detailed, about a 4-month process that we are undergoing in reviewing our complete structure, our organization, in order to do just what you're saying, to make sure that all our resources are focused on our veteran and their care.
So I'm going to hold you to this. You are now guaranteeing that after you fire tens of thousands of employees, it will not take longer for veterans to get appointments and receive care. Now let's go to, can you guarantee that if the VA fires thousands more employees, hospitals and equipment, all those things, the hospitals and the equipment will remain clean and safe, yes or no?
Senator, what I'm guaranteeing is a detailed, methodical look and review, a much-needed review of our structure to ensure that our manpower and resources are focused on our veteran and their care.
So you're not going to guarantee that. Can you guarantee that if the VA fires thousands more employees, benefits claims won't be delayed?
Madam, I guarantee we are going to do a detailed, thoughtful review and focus our efforts on improving our service to our veterans.
But that's not a guarantee because you don't know what's going to happen, but you're already naming the number of employees you're going to reduce. We are going to watch what you're doing, and I will echo Senator Blumenthal's request for the written plan, the metrics you are using, and the reasons you think that this kind of mass firing is going to result in improved efficiency. As you may know, New Hampshire does not have a full-service VA hospital. In 2023, then-candidate Trump visited New Hampshire and promised a brand-new, state-of-the-art VA hospital for the Granite State, saying that we would no longer be without a full-service facility. Now it seems to me that if you are building a new full-service hospital, you're going to have to hire people to help provide new services. So is the VA going to hire contractors and employees to build and work in the new facility President Trump promised Granite Staters, or is the plan to cut resources and hope that we don't notice?
The plan, Senator, is to ensure that we focus all of our resources as much as we can on the direct care of our veterans. We have grown exponentially over the past decade or more. We have increased our budget immensely, but our performance has
we're
gone
helping
down.
a lot more veterans, and we have to stretch to reach that goal, and there is work to be done. I am right with all my colleagues. This has been a bipartisan effort. We want the best care possible and the best services possible for our veterans, and we have work to do. We need to invest in new systems, which, by the way, it has not always been easy to get bipartisan support throughout the federal government for doing that. But being arbitrary, and as the head of VFW said last week, using a meat cleaver instead of a scalpel is not the way to do this. So I'm going to hold the president to his promise for a new full-service VA center in New Hampshire. I'm going to insist that it be properly staffed, and I'm looking forward to seeing written documentation and an analysis that indicates that things will be better off after you take staffing back to 2019 levels in spite of the new people we are helping with the Pact Act. I will be looking for that analysis because right now it's not adding up. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator King.
I was struck when Senator Cassidy mentioned poetry. So I asked ChatGPT to write us a poem about the firings at the VA. Here's the poem, which I will provide for the record. In the land where the eagle proudly soared, where freedom's song was oft restored, a shadow crept across the plains as whispers spoke of recent pains. The halls, once filled with earnest care, now echoed with a vacant air. For hands that healed and hearts that served found futures tossed, their paths unnerved. The veterans, with stories deep, their guardians gone, their solace steep, they wondered if the promises made were fading like the evening shade. Oh, what of honor, what of trust, when noble missions turn to dust? Yet in the hearts where courage burns, the spirit of the warrior yearns. For though the times are harsh and cold, the tales of valor ever bold remind us, both young and old, that some truths are worth more than gold. So raise a glass to those who stood in every field through fire and blood, and may we find in days ahead the wisdom to restore what's fled. Pretty amazing. And I think it captures what's going on here. By the way, firing 80,000 people will reduce the VA budget by 1.2%. I think we ought to keep that in mind because people think, well, we're cutting the budget, we're saving a lot of money. 1.2%. This is performance. This isn't policy. And it is 80,000 people. The memo of March 4th said our initial objective is a return to our 2019 end strength. That's 83,000 people. I just don't know how anybody with a straight face can say you're going to cut that many people and still provide the same level of services. It just doesn't compute. The second piece that I want to inquire about, and I'll ask you this question, is what about these contracts? I saw the little video of the secretary the other day proudly saying, we've eliminated 600 contracts, we're going to save all this money. I want to know what the contracts are. And we've been asking that for a week, and we're getting no answers. What are those 585 contracts for? Because I fear that they're for mental health counselors or radiology technicians or maintenance. I mean, those contracts are for something. And it's an insult to this committee and to the United States Senate that we have no transparency whatsoever on what these contracts are. So that's a pretty simple ask. Will you take that question back, Mr. Engelbaum?
Senator, it would be my pleasure. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of information on the specific contracts that's handled under a different mechanism, but I will take that for record and take that back.
Well, somebody knows what those, and I don't expect you to know, but somebody knows what those contracts are because they made a decision to cut them, and I think that information should be shared with this committee. So it's hard for me to understand what's going on here except a motivation to show that we're cutting the workforce for relatively small returns in terms of the overall budget of the agency. And I think you use the term meat cleaver. The operative term is chainsaw. Yes. That's what that grinning guy is using as a chainsaw instead of a thoughtful process. So I would like to see, as I think has already been requested, what the plan is for these 83,000 people. How are you going to approach that? Who's going to do it? What's the criteria? Because it's hard for me to believe. I understand, and you said we've grown, for sure, but 7 new bills have been passed with regard to veterans benefits since 2019, the biggest being the Pact Act, which require a lot of people to administer. And so I just want to know how you're going to resolve those kinds of issues. So I apologize, Mr. Chairman, for not speaking to these bills, but these people had the good luck to be here today. Thank you for your testimony, and we'll look forward to working with you on these bills. This is a very bipartisan committee. The Pact Act passed by bipartisan majorities in both houses. So we want to work on those things, but we need some facts. And I, for one, believe that the agency ought to be providing that information.
Thank you, Senator. And as I stated previously, it'd be my pleasure to come and brief you, this entire committee, on our plan and the thoughtful review that we're undergoing right now, and to get at what the ultimate number will be and what we should look like in the future for success to better serve our veterans.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'll submit my poem for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Engelbaum, is the VA too bureaucratic?
I think federal government as a whole is the definition of bureaucracy.
There are obviously places where we can create efficiencies and deliver services to veterans better than what we...
There absolutely are. There absolutely are in any large organization, but especially, look, I can't be part of the VA because I'm dedicated to the mission and our veteran, but I know, and after speaking with a lot of folks, many of them, employees, veterans, there is a lot of bureaucracy there. We can do better. We will do better. We need to leverage. We need to flatline our management. We need to flatline organizations. We need to streamline mission. We need systems that can do what we need them to do. There's so much work that we have to do, and as we've proven, more and more people, more and more money is not the answer. It's not saying that we won't put the money in the people where we need them, but it's not the answer.
Yeah, I agree. How would the Restore VA Accountability Act improve the VA workforce by giving supervisors more authority?
There's nothing more disheartening to our workers themselves than having substandard employees around them. There's nothing, as everybody knows, that brings down an organization more by having employees that don't do what they need to do, and you're unable to either remove them, take disciplinary action, or it becomes so painful that they continue to exist. What happens is we rely more and more heavily on our top performers, on our middle performers, and don't get me wrong, we have so many dedicated employees in the VA, so many people that have dedicated their lives, veterans, non-veterans, spouses, you name it. The vast majority of good, hardworking folks that want to do well, but we have those that don't, and there's nothing that destroys an organization more. And those employees working next to them know who they are.
So
But
it's a
we have
morale
to-
issue?
It's a morale issue, it's a performance issue, it's a workload issue. And we want to make sure that we have due process. That's really, really important. But we can't stymie leadership and management. And I always remind people, managers are part of that. They're employees too. We need to hold managers accountable. It's not an us versus them question. It's a matter of us as a team, and everybody at every level have to be held accountable.
Yeah. Mr. Montoya, Senator Moran has legislation on the agenda to improve community care provider scheduling. And Senator Hassan has legislation to improve internal VHA scheduling. Can you talk about how those two work together and what improvements would veterans trying to get appointments see if both of those bills were enacted?
Yeah, so I think, thanks so much for the question, Senator. I think, I reflect on my time as a medical center director at 3 different stations, as well as my most recent experience in the field. And where I see external provider scheduling working is that it reduces the amount of time that it takes for a veteran to get an appointment scheduled in the community. So, for example, without external provider scheduling, it takes roughly 30 minutes for a veteran to get scheduled in the community. Whereas with EPS, it's actually about 7 minutes for that to happen. So it allows our scheduling staff, our team, to be more efficient as they're looking at the scheduling grids for other physicians in the community. So it really helps out, and the two work together in collaboration to make sure that we're providing that care.
Great. I hope we can get both of them done. Mr. Friel, what problems are you having disciplining veteran benefits claim agents today without any new legal authority?
Yes, Senator, thank you for that question. So one of the concerns we have is that we've all heard the claim sharks and all of that. Right now, the only authority we have is from the Office of General Counsel to send a cease and desist order. We have no other ramifications outside of that. They just change their business model and come back as someone new. So the ability to be able to actually prosecute people and take action against people who are basically frauding our veterans and abusing
Like you have
them.
any authority other than a cease and desist
Cease and
letter?
desist, yes, sir.
Okay. What are the most common rules that claim agents or attorneys break?
So, okay. So one of the major rules is that for an initial claim, there should not be any fees charged right? And we have these agencies that go in and they promise veterans that we will help you get a better, a good rating, and then they charge on the back end for, they take a part of their retroactive payment, they take part of what their change is over the course of a period of time, and they take money from our veterans who are entitled to that because of their level of disability.
Seems really gross, and I hope we can do something to correct down on it. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Senator Yeagle.
Well, in the spirit of Senator King, I was actually trying to write a haiku, but I only got to couldn't get to the last line. I'll have to submit it for the record once I get there. But in the other area where Senator King was talking about, one of the programs that has been identified, something that's very personal to me, is the National Center for PTSD, which is a world-leading research and education center on post-traumatic stress disorder. For us that have PTSD, this is extremely important because we know that it's an evolving field of research that could also be helped, not just us, but also end up saving us money in the long run if we can find better treatments for PTSD that are more effective, quicker, and also in some regards cheaper. But that was one of the contracts that was just terminated recently. And this is really to Mr. Montoya. The VA said that the terminations will not negatively affect veteran care, benefits, or services, and that they were identified through a deliberative, multi-level review. However, I am really concerned that these terminations will negatively impact veterans' care, specifically something like this. So can you explain what safeguards you have in place to make sure this won't happen, and how you restore contracts that were incorrectly terminated? Because in my opinion, if it was identified through deliberative multi-level review, I have no idea how someone look at the National Center for PTSD, which other countries actually talk and try to get research from to help their veterans, how that came under the purview of being cut.
Sure. Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I think this is one that's near and dear to my heart, as I was up in Vermont, and they do have the National Center for PTSD, and I think there's a very deliberate process in looking at the contract review to make sure that there isn't any ill will that occurs to our veterans. There is also a process for us to reverse those, as have been done in many, many cases. And so I'd be happy to look at that particular contract that you're asking about and see what it entails.
And then another contract that was listed for cancellation was the VA's Pact Act Enterprise Management Office, which supports the VA ability to carry out the benefits and health care delivery promised under the Bipartisan Pact Act. Again, something very personal to me. I lived next to a burn pit for almost a month. The men that I served with, some of them have died, unfortunately, from toxic exposure, some of them from very rare cancers at young ages. So I'm very concerned that, some of these reductions, while we're trying to finally help these men and women, are actually going to be impacted, and actually we're going to be sliding backwards. And since the bill was signed into law, nearly 60,000 veterans in Arizona have filed claims. Can you, Mr. Engelbaum, can you please explain how the cancellation of this contract won't impact those benefits who qualify for the Pact Act benefits and health care? And there's still more men and women that are actually jumping on to this because we want them to actually get their services and disability ratings because of the Pact Act.
Yeah, Senator, unfortunately, I can't address that specific contract. Happy to take that back. As just stated, one of the things it's not that we would stop doing something. So I don't know, for example, the analysis would be is, do we have a contractor doing something for us that we could do internally? There's different things that went into, I think, some of the deliberations. But notwithstanding, as mentioned, we're committed to taking care of our veterans. If we didn't get it right, we will definitely take a relook at it, and we'll have the focus on our veteran.
Yeah, and I mean, my concern again is that we are treating, I think, the VA much like we treat other parts of the government, where there needs to be certain sensitivities. Right now, I'm hearing reports of men and women having to do their treatments and their PTSD therapy in cubicles, open-air cubicles, where essentially some of the therapists are told to get white noise and put ambient music in the background, while obviously next door someone could be listening to these veterans going through the therapy session. As someone who has done PTSD therapy, you have to expose yourself. You have to really let yourself go, and in order for you to start real therapy, it's not going to be a really good environment when these men and women feel like they're not going to have a safe and secure environment to actually talk about what happened to them, what they're feeling, everything else like that, if they're being forced to speak in this open-air cubicle. And this is part of the problem when you force people back to the office, but there's not enough space for these men. Do you understand, or have you heard of this problem? Because I am actually hearing about this across the country now.
Senator, if there are any specific issues, happy to look at them as far as our veterans care. As far as back to the office, we do have a detailed plan in place. We are making sure, so for example, that there are extensions right now, pretty much unquestioned if people don't have the space to put people back. What we do know is that our clinical providers have been showing up day in and day out for years. But mostly the support staff, the administration, they haven't been. Right? There are some jobs that lend themselves to actually being remote or working things and we can better support, but the vast majority, we work better together. We work better together, we collaborate, we're part of a team, you develop a spree, just like in the Army or wherever you're at, you're part of something, you're part of a mission. So we firmly believe that we are more effective, more efficient, and better, for the most part, when we work together and we call people back in. Like I said, our providers are there on the front lines every day. We owe it to them to be there to support them as well.
Without a doubt, I just worry about the situation where you're putting some of these men and women in a compromised situation because we're trying to overall create a policy that might have some merit to it, but then is creating this system where, again, it's not conducive to PTSD therapy.
We will definitely take that into consideration, Senator. Thank you.
Yield back, Chairman.
Senator Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here today. Mr. Chairman, my understanding is that in the fourth quarter of '24, there were over 30,000 vacancies at the VA, including 3,400 schedulers, 1,200 custodians, 1,800 social workers, 2,400 doctors, 6,300 registered nurses. I heard Mr. Engelbaum say appropriately enough that he wants to do a detailed and thoughtful review of the whole process. Do you think arbitrarily laying off 2,500 workers and planning to lay off another 83,000 is a detailed and thoughtful review?
Senator, thank you. As mentioned, the initial thing that hit the news about the planning factor is to lead and to force people to make hard decisions and recommendations. We are in the process. I will come and brief the committee, sir, at your disposal on how we are doing that over the next 3 to 4 months and what we're going to review to make sure that we tailor the mission and the people.
But if we already have, and I should tell you, and I think Mr. Montoya knows that he's familiar with our part of the world.
Yes, sir.
In White River Junction, we have a very well-functioning VA. I go around the state a lot. I talk to veterans. They're very proud of what is going on there. I don't think any veteran in this country thinks that it makes sense at a time when we already have a significant shortage of workers to arbitrarily lay off 2,500 and threaten to lay off another 83,000. Now, Mr. Chairman, as I think you are aware, the Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman? The VFW, Veterans of Foreign Wars.
You have my attention.
The Veterans of Foreign Wars just stated the other day, and I quote part of what their statement was, "We now call upon VA to reconsider its planned reduction of 83,000 employees and thoroughly review any proposed cuts prior to rolling out further announcement like this," end of quote. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to introduce a resolution supporting the VFW. I would hope that you can support that. All that they are saying, which makes common sense to me. You want to make the VA more efficient? Let's do it. You're right. Is there a bureaucracy? Yup. Let's deal with that. But do it in an intelligent, planned way with the cooperation of the veterans organizations who are on the ground. Who better can come to tell you that you have people who are not working well, all right? But to arbitrarily say, hey, we're going to lay off 83,000 people, that makes sense to nobody. On a more provincial point of view, so, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to work, and I would hope that we could have bipartisan support here. We're simply saying, to quote Mr. Engelbaum, let's go forward in a detailed and thoughtful process. Work with us, all right? Do you believe that health care is a right for every veteran in this country?
Absolutely.
Good. Good. Okay, let me just say.
I appreciate that.
Okay, that's fine. I agree with you. Do you think we should do a better job in reaching out? One of the problems, which I've been working on for years, some success, is letting veterans know about the benefits to which they are legally entitled. I'm not sure that we do as good a job on that as we should. Do you think we should do a better job in that area?
I'll turn that over. I know it's very, very important to do so. I know we've made strides. I'm not sure if there's anybody here that can really, you want to address that? But always think we could always do better, Senator.
I would recall, excuse me, I don't have a lot of time, I apologize, but doing a town meeting in Bennington, Vermont, a number of years ago about the prescription drug benefits that veterans are entitled to. A lot of veterans didn't even know that. But my point is, if you believe that every veteran, I'm hearing you say that, is entitled to the health care that we have provided them, if you're going to do aggressive outreach, am I hearing you say that? Okay. You're going to need more staff, not less, to take care of our veterans. All right, on a provincial note, we are on the list, whatever that may mean, in Vermont to get 2 new state-of-the-art CBOCs. One is in Chittenden County. I don't know if anybody is familiar with that. Ms. Cohn, are you familiar with that? No, okay, just. Mr. Montoya, are you familiar with that?
Very much so, sir.
Okay, can you help me out here? We have 2 on the list, one in Chittenden County, one probably in the Keene area in New Hampshire, which Vermonters in the southern part of the state can utilize. Can you give me a status report on that, sir?
Yeah, so I know, sir, I don't have it, but I'll get it for the record for you and talk with your staff members as well. But I think this is one that's very important to our veterans in Vermont and New Hampshire to make sure that they get the care. Last I had on that is that they were going through the acquisition process, but I want to be very detailed in my response to you.
Will you get back to me on that? I'll give you a ring.
100%.
All right. All right, look, the bottom line is it's not complicated. I don't think there's anybody who doesn't think there's too much bureaucracy at the VA. I presume everybody wants to make it more efficient. I presume everybody wants to do its best for veterans. I presume we all want veterans to be able to take advantage of the programs that Congress has passed to help them. All right? You don't do it by arbitrarily laying off tens of thousands of people. You do it by working with the veterans organizations, by working with this committee. Mr. Engelbaum, is there anything I said that you disagree with?
No, Senator. Looking forward to working with committee, and I met some of the representatives behind me right before the meeting and invited them for some conversations, and I look forward to discussions and working together to better support our veterans.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Blumenthal has another follow-up or his request, in which I will recognize him, and then I'm going to have my follow-up, and then we'll change panels. And we're going to recess at that point in time in which we change so that both Senator Blumenthal and I can hear the witnesses in the second panel, but we have an 11:45 vote. So we'll run over to vote, come back, and we'll restart. Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you. For the record, Mr. Engelbaum, I just want to expand on the number that was given to you by Senator Sanders. As of the end of fiscal year 2024, there were 36,000 vacancies in veterans health care. There were 2,751 in the VBA. And by the way, those healthcare positions, they were 1,800 social workers, 693 psychologists, 2,042 doctors, 6,300 registered nurses, 3,400 healthcare schedulers, and 1,200 custodians. Every single one of those positions, vital to veterans' health care. So I would suggest respectfully that rather than focusing on how to fire VA healthcare workers, which is what the Restore Act seems to do, and what Elon Musk and Donald Trump are doing through Secretary Collins, that you would be better off trying to figure out how to recruit to fill those positions. What you're doing right now is going to discourage and deter anybody who wants to be in the healthcare professional field from joining the VA. Why would they when your focus is on firing them? Let me also give you an opportunity to correct the record. I think you contended that VBA claims processing times have gone up since the Pact Act. That is untrue. The average number of days to complete a pre-Pact Act claim were 166. The average number of days to complete a claim in January 2025, after passage of the Pact Act, is 148. So actually, when you say we can do better, we will do better, you were doing better. You were doing better. And now you're going to do worse. So again, to adopt the analogy that I had before, you're sinking the ship, basically. And we're talking here about rearranging chairs on the deck of that sinking ship. Call it the Titanic or whatever you wish. But we do need bipartisan cooperation to stop the bleeding, as the VFW Commander-in-Chief told us. Finally, I just want to say I was remiss in not specifically mentioning before, but we've worked with the professionals who are before us here. I know that you intend to do good things with the VA. I've worked with Al Montoya, for example, in Connecticut, and we want to empower you. I know it's difficult within the VA, but there are thousands and thousands of dedicated VA workers right now. They deserve to be elevated, not trashed or denigrated as Elon Musk and Donald Trump are doing. Our veterans are not suckers. They are our heroes. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Just a couple of thoughts and a question from me. First, Senator Blumenthal, while I don't think he was diminishing the value of the Restore Act overly, but I want to respond. The Restore and Accountability Act is about providing the best care and quality opportunities for veterans. I think it has a side benefit. It's great to work. It's better to work in a place in which you don't allow people who are misbehave, commit fraud, negligent to the patient to continue to work there, or to just move them to another position as the VA has done. And I'm committed to trying to make sure that the Restore Act is something we accomplish. It was overwhelmingly supported in a bipartisan way. In the past, it ran into legal and regulatory kind of challenges, and we need to work to make sure we get the law right. But eliminating people at any agency that misbehave is a good thing for the customers they serve and a good thing for the people they work with. I would like, a couple of my colleagues mentioned the Inspector General. Both Republican and Democrat colleagues mentioned the use of the Inspector General. I'd add for a second time my public voice to the importance of restoring an Inspector General to the Department of Veterans Affairs. And as we try to figure out how to right-size the VA, the Inspector General has been our ally in finding ways to do things better, or things that happen at the VA that make no sense or inefficient. And an Inspector General is hugely important to the efforts that you indicate you're trying to accomplish. And so I just highlight again the value of an Inspector General. And then I wanted to, and we also, we the majority, but we as the chairman of the committee have requested information from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Some of it has been answered, and other components of our inquiries, some of the things you heard from particularly the minority, the Democratic side of our committee, we're asking for that kind of information too, and I highlight that for you to return to the VA to encourage the answering of members of Congress's question. And that only reiterates my view that this committee will and should have significant opportunities to participate in the decision-making process about workforce at the VA. And finally, Mr. Engelbaum, you've tried several times to finish a sentence that I think is important, at least you think it's important, because you tried to say it a number of times, and it has to do with the 83,000 or the 80,000. I think you've tried to explain that is not necessarily the goal. My guess is that and that was certainly reported in press and maybe was in a memo at the VA, so I'm not discounting it. Somebody may have come up with this number. But is your goal, what is your goal in regard to increasing, let me ask you this question. Is it conceivable you'd have the analysis done at the VA and determine that in certain areas you need more employees, not less? And is the goal is to figure out how to get rid of 80,000 people, or is it a different goal?
It's the former, Senator. Obviously, we want to be efficient and we want to be lean. As I was trying to get across, you have to start with something when you start with the planning process. When we're talking about the return, we're talking about a 15% is what we're looking at when you're talking about over 470,000. But, and I will be very clear, and I think the Secretary will be very clear on this, we are going to do our review. We're going to let the process fall out, and ultimately he will make a decision what the final number would be based upon that analysis that we are conducting. As you rightly said, we probably should plus up in other areas. We will take down in other areas. We will also looking at what we're going to stop doing as far as specific mission. And as I mentioned, flatlining bureaucracies, numerous things that we want to take a look at. But if you don't start with a goal, or start with some sort of planning factor, aggressive planning factor to force people to think and think outside the box and come up with options, then you're going to go nowhere. And so that's what really that is. That goal, that planning factor enables us to start our in-depth analysis, bottom-up review that we are conducting with the entirety of the VA chain of command in order to arrive at a recommendation for the Secretary later on this year.
I wanted to have you the opportunity to finish your sentence or your thoughts, your paragraph. I, too, have indicated my concern with a number. The goal ought not be a number. The goal ought to be determine what the mission of the Department of Veterans Affairs is and how many people in the workforce it takes to accomplish that mission in an effective and efficient way. And that, I think, members of this committee are seemingly willing to help the VA accomplish. The 80,000 number has really created the uncertainty, the difficulty, the criticism that comes from those statements. So we look forward to answers to our questions, and we look forward to working to figuring out how to right-size the Department of Veterans Affairs, but not in an arbitrary way. And I thank you, and if you report that to your superiors, and I don't know that that's a poor word in today's world, if that you would report that to your colleagues, and particularly see about getting us answers to our previous questions.
Absolutely, Senator.
Thank you very much. We're going to recess so that Senator Blumenthal and I can walk across the street and vote. And the second panel, you're welcome to stay in your seats or take maybe the things so we're ready when we come back. If you'll be ready to take their chairs where these witnesses are now seated. Thank you for your testimony and thank you for your presence. Thank you for your patience. The committee will come back to order. I want to ask unanimous consent to add to today's hearing record letters of support for the Veterans Second Amendment Protection Act from the Veterans of Foreign Wars of the United States, the National Disability Rights Network, Vietnam Veterans of America, Black Veterans Empowerment Council, Gun Owners of America, Military Order of the Purple Heart, Nation Shooting Sports Federation, Firearms Regulatory Accountability Council, AMAC Action, Association of Mature American Citizens, and the Turning Point Action. Hearing no objection, this must have been the appropriate time to ask that request. It is so ordered. I now welcome our second panel of witnesses to the table. Testifying is Cole Lyle, the Director of Veterans Affairs and Rehabilitation for the American Legion. Ashlyn Hancock-Lohman, the Director of Government and Legislative Affairs for the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors, TAP. And Patrick Murray, the Director of National Legislative Service for the Veterans of Foreign Wars of the United States. People we're all familiar with. Thank you for your continued education of our committee. And let me yield now to Mr. Lyle.
Well, thank you, Chairman Moran, distinguished members of the committee. On behalf of National Commander Jim LaCourcier, Jr., and more than 1.6 million dues-paying members of the American Legion, we thank you for the opportunity to offer our testimony for the record on pending legislation. In good faith, we cannot consider these proposals today without recognizing the implementation elephant in the room, considering cost and staff demands of these bills with recent policy and personnel actions. It is vital to acknowledge this hearing comes at a time of uncertainty and widespread change. I want to be clear, the American Legion has never shied away from the responsibility of being a voice for veterans, and we will not start now. To veterans listening, the Legion exists for you. The VA exists for you. and we will continue to advocate for an effective VA on your behalf. On March 6, 2025, Commander LaCourcier released a statement expressing this sentiment and invited veterans to share how these changes are impacting their lives. As of today, we have received over 4,200 comments, and we look forward to sharing the results with the committee and will certainly flag any mission-critical impacts we identify. The American Legion supports many of the bills being discussed today, having been drafted because of veteran experience across the country. They are the result of collaboration between the VSOs, committee staff, and VA. We all have different jobs, but the same goal: to improve the lives of service members, veterans, and their families. All of these bills are worthy of continued discussion, but the big challenge will be forecasting how their implementation will, if passed, be successful. The recent policy and personnel actions make it more important than ever for veteran service organizations to be a part of the legislative and regulatory process, and we look forward to this committee's inclusion of Legionnaires' voices. The American Legion has spoken with Secretary Collins, senior VA personnel, and Legionnaires on the ground about the need for more transparency in the methodology of these changes and plans to mitigate potential impacts. We believe the voice of our membership can provide crucial feedback to ensure no veteran goes without the care they need when they need it, to provide veterans the benefits they've earned, keep veterans off the streets, and most importantly, keep them from spiraling into a critical mass of despair that drives them to make an irreversible decision. This is the American Legion's #1 priority for a reason. The values and habits the military instills don't disappear when we transition out. 8% of companies in the S&P 500 are led by CEOs who served. 9.1% of U.S. small businesses are veteran-owned, generating $1 trillion in annual receipts and employing 5 million Americans. 25% roughly of federal employees are veterans, with more than 500,000 employed by agencies around the world. Further, according to the Department of Labor, veterans make up 10% of emergency medical technicians, 19% of firefighters, and 25% of police officers. Veterans have shown a willingness to donate their time and money to aid disaster relief, youth mentorship, and other community-based programs. In short, whether in public service, the private sector, or volunteerism, veterans continue to display unwavering dedication to their families, communities, states, and indeed the country long after they leave the service. Cultivated during service, a veteran's unique set of skills continues to pay tangible dividends to the American people. But perhaps more importantly, service members experience shared adversity in pursuit of common goals from the moment they arrive at boot camp to the day they get out, learning to work together regardless of race, religion, or socioeconomic background. They are bound together by an esprit de corps that sheds preconceived notions and biases, forcing them to work as a team. Without the ability to look beyond our differences and work together, the U.S. military would crumble. Government leaders from both sides of the aisle would do well to emulate this mentality, honoring the service of our nation's veterans to ensure they continue thriving. America will undoubtedly be better for it. Chairman Moran, Ranking Member Blumenthal, for the sake of time, more detailed and thorough responses can be found within our written testimony, and I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Lyle, thank you very much. Ms. Aycock Lohman, you are recognized. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Moran, Ranking Member Blumenthal, and distinguished committee members, the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors is grateful for the opportunity to testify today on behalf of the more than 120,000 surviving families TAPS is honored to serve. TAPS strongly supports the Love Lives On Act, and we thank Chairman Moran, Senator Warnock, and our 22 original co-sponsors for reintroducing one of our top legislative priorities. Under current law, surviving spouses must wait until the age of 55 to remarry, or they lose most of their benefits. The average age of a surviving spouse in this era is between 25 and 35 years old, forcing them to wait decades to remarry and retain their benefits. Just over 500,000 surviving spouses receive benefits through the VA, but barely 35,000 of them are under the age of 55. That is less than 7%. Of those 35,000 surviving spouses, only 5% of them have chosen to legally remarry. But this is more than just a numbers issue. The Love Lives On Act is equally about keeping our promise to our veterans. When a service member takes the oath of office, they are making the ultimate commitment, signing a blank check that is payable with their very life. In return, our government makes an unbreakable promise that if something happens to them due to that service, their spouse and children will be taken care of, period. There was never a caveat that the commitment would end because their spouse chose to find happiness again. Honor and sacrifice do not come with an expiration date, and neither should our nation support. This is deeply personal to every single widow and widower who has accepted a folded flag. This impacts survivors like Marcy from Kansas, who is waiting to remarry, but was expelled from her church for living with her fiance, forcing her to choose between financial stability and rebuilding her life. This impacts survivors like Kanan from Louisiana, who did remarry because she wanted her 5 children to know that she chose love over money, but is now viewed as her children's fiduciary, not their parent, in the eyes of the law. This impacts survivors like Rebecca from North Carolina, who never had the chance to start a family with her late husband, but chose to remarry because the sanctity of marriage and having her son in wedlock mattered to her. This impacts survivors like Linda from Texas, who remarried after 55 and is allowed to keep her benefits. These are surviving spouses who have lived through the unimaginable loss of their soulmate and are choosing a chance at happiness. They are more than just data points. All they are asking for is the right to choose how they move forward and pick up the broken pieces of their lives. TAP strongly supports the Caring for Survivors Act and thanks Ranking Member Blumenthal and Senator Bozeman for reintroducing this important bill. Raising DIC to 55% of the compensation rate paid to a 100% disabled veteran will increase DIC by an average of $454 per month and provide long overdue parity with other federal survivor benefits. More than 500,000 survivors receive DIC from the VA. The current monthly base rate is $1,653, but has only been increased by COLA since 1993. As surviving spouse of Kansas, Katie Hubbard states, increasing DIC would allow me to afford groceries and childcare, medical expenses, and home and car maintenance while just trying to survive. It is time we fix this inequity. Our nation's surviving families should not be receiving less than their civilian counterparts. TAP strongly supports the Veterans Claims Act and thanks Senator Bozeman for his leadership on this critical issue. Since the passage of the Pact Act, TAPS has seen an influx of predatory claims consultants targeting survivors. With over 30,000 additional survivors now eligible for benefits, increased regulatory oversight is crucial to ensuring that these survivors receive adequate representation throughout the VA claims process. TAPS is not an accredited veteran service organization because current regulations require VSOs to serve any veteran or survivor who requests their assistance. Instead, TAP's mission is dedicating to supporting all those who lost a loved one due to military service, and we would be honored to become accredited and make the process easier for them. But to be clear, TAPS has never and will never charge for our services. As the leading voice for the families of those who died as a result of illness connected to toxic exposure, TAPS led efforts to pass the Bipartisan Pact Act, but we know the work is far from done. TAPS strongly supports the Aviation Cancers Examination Study Act and thanks Senators Cotton and Kelly for reintroducing this critical legislation to address the prevalence and mortality of cancer among the military aviation community. Finally, TAPS would like to express our support for the Veterans Assuring Critical Care expansion to support Service Members Act and the VA Accountability and Whistleblower Protection Act. We thank you, Chairman Moran, for your leadership on both of these important issues. TAPS appreciates the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Murray.
Chairman Moran, Ranking Member Blumenthal, members of the committee, on behalf of the men and women of the VFWs and auxiliary, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak on these subjects. On accountability, the VFW fully agrees the Secretary of Veteran Affairs should have the ability to remove bad employees from their roles. However, we do not want to see this authority used to arbitrarily remove competent and capable employees simply as a cost-cutting measure. Reduction in force efforts should not be bluntly used to satisfy an arbitrary budget goal. VA should always be fully staffed with competent and capable employees to serve the men and women who have earned their health care and benefits. VA has recently dismissed more than 2,400 employees. Nowhere in these messages did these actions explain what warranted them. Members on this committee regularly say VA needs to weed out the bad actors, but the dismissal of these employees was not done because it was warranted. Instead, it was done because it was easy. Before this committee advances this bill, we believe there should be proper oversight to ensure the men and women who serve our veterans, caregivers, survivors are not being arbitrarily removed from their crucial roles. The VFW supports the Access Act, which would provide overall enhancements to the VA community care program. Since the passage of the Mission Act, VA has not implemented this program consistently across its entire network. Veterans deserve consistency in their care, and this is a good step towards providing that. While this proposal does not address VA direct care, we would be remiss not to remind this committee that some of the reasons community care appointments and costs are increasing is because VA cannot provide some of these vital services. Care in the community is VA care, but providing resources for care only in the community and not also for VA direct care can lead to a less capable VA, which could be detrimental. VA direct care and community care can complement each other to provide a full suite of services for veterans. Often, CCN is used to relieve the burden of care, but providing additional resources to only one side of that will exacerbate these problems. We urge this committee to fund community care improvements, but also continue to improve the direct care so the pressure release valve is not overused. The VFW supports the draft bill, VA Claims Act of 2025, as written. We appreciate the committee's efforts to provide a compromise that provides necessary protections and allows for the expansion of accreditation to certain individuals who seek to provide claims assistance for a reasonable fee. This bill provides necessary guardrails for claims preparation and preserves veterans' choice when seeking a reasonable free market alternative to the current process. The VFW has expressed our red lines regarding any comprehensive bill put forth, seeking our support. Veterans should not have to pay future benefits. Active duty service members should not have to pay for claims assistance prior to transition. And no one who prepares a claim should have any financial affiliation with medical examiners who could possibly affect the outcome of that claim. We believe these are common sense concerns that we insist be in any bill that is advanced, and we are grateful the committee has listened to our feedback and produced that exact bill. To the VFW, this has never been about money. Accredited agents and attorneys can make a healthy living operating within the ethical confines of the established non-predatory fee structure. When payment comes from retroactive benefits, it is hard to consider it predatory since the veteran is guaranteed to be able to settle that debt. Putting veterans in debt for accessing their earned benefits is wrong, and we're grateful this committee agrees with that. We would also recommend that this committee consider a reasonable fee cap added to this structure. We don't have a specific amount to suggest, however, we would ask the committee to consider the factors contained within 38 CFR when making that determination. Chairman Moran, Ranking Member Blumenthal, this concludes my testimony. I'm prepared to answer any questions you or the members of the committee may have.
Thank you very much. In testifying before our committee and following our work, I've been working on key provisions of the Access Act over 2 Congresses now, and I'm particularly burdened by the VA's classification of mental health residential rehabilitation programs for veterans who require a higher level of mental health and addiction care. It's my view the VA should rely on the Commission for Accreditation Rehabilitation Facilities and Joint Commission accredited programs in the community to deliver this critical care closer to veterans' homes and closer to their support systems. Could any or all of you describe for the committee how this negatively is impacting veterans your organizations work with? And by this, I mean the VA's position or actions in regard to residential care for those services. Mr. Murray?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, so my wife went through this program. About a couple years ago, she was trying to get into one of these facilities that she found on her own that provided the exact care that she was looking for. 3 different times, she was referred. 3 different times those referrals were rescinded. They tried to send her to VA facilities that didn't offer the service they wanted. They were all male facilities, or they were for substance abuse, but that's not what she was looking for, or they were for eating disorders, but that's not what she was looking for. She found the one, but it was outside of Optum's third-party administrator network, so it got denied again. The RRTPs are, we believe, something that can actually save lives. When veterans reach out and ask for that help, they can't get turned away because they might not come back again. That's why these improvements are very important.
Thank you for your answer to the question and your personal experience relayed to us. I mean, this, again, I've been broadly interested in community care for a long time, but this particular issue strikes me as one in which it's life and death. And we've heard and seen in testimony after testimony and stories related to me by veterans and their families how important it is for that residential treatment facility, and yet the VA is unwilling to provide that. Either of you want to say anything more about that, or we got it covered?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just echo Pat's comments and yours that this is a crucial piece of the Access Act that will save lives.
Thank you. Ashlyn?
I would also add that these are life-saving measures. At TAPS, we see a very large number of survivors who come to us that lost a loved one to suicide. My mother was an Air Force veteran who died by suicide when I was in college. But we were under the TRICARE system, and when she wanted mental health treatment, she was able to get inpatient fairly easily, even if it was outside of the official providers through DOD. Of course, it did unfortunately not save her life, but she was able to get that access that she needed when she asked for it. And we know that it's a very different system for our veterans, and ensuring that they have access to that means that more families are not coming to us, and we do not want to ever have another family need to come to TAPS.
Thank you, all three of you. Mr. Lyle, thanks to you for the American Legion's support of the Veterans Access Act. I appreciate your acknowledgement that failure to codify the existing community care standards as a minimum access standard leaves them vulnerable to changes that make it more difficult for veterans to understand their rights under the Mission Act. And it clearly in recent times, it's been difficult in too many instances for veterans to be told of their capability of finding or pursuing care in the community. And so under the Mission Act, you indicate there's potential for adding inconsistency and the VA staff working on the program. So I just wanted you to elaborate a minute about how codifying the access standards benefit veterans and make it easier for VA staff to understand and deliver that care in the community.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've seen evidence since the Mission Act passed, because it was regulatory and not codified in statute, that at the VISN and the local VAMC level, you're right, there is a wide variety of education efforts at those levels to inform veterans of their options. And even if they are informed, oftentimes veterans can get denied the referral or shortened on the authorization approved time for community care. And it's vital to codify these access standards so that the veteran's decision with their provider is the #1 priority, and the veteran remains the center of what VA does.
Thank you. And Mr. Murray, I won't leave you out. The VFW seems especially strong in its support for the Access Act. Again, I'm pleased by that. You have a story, though, in your written testimony about a VFW member who gave up on seeking residential care from the VA because the program this veteran needed was not in a VA network. If you want to provide our office with more information, we'd be glad to be an advocate for that veteran. But
that was my wife.
Oh, it's your wife.
Yeah.
So it's the same story that you just described.
Was provided a referral to a facility that was, I think the first one was in Utah, in the VA network, but under Tri-West. We live in Maryland. It was denied. She worked with someone else at DCVA to get a referral to a facility, I believe, in either Arizona or New Mexico. Same story. Nowhere could we find anywhere where, in law, it said that. We ended up trying to, navigate the system and found somewhere in Pennsylvania, but that was after, as I mentioned, being referred to eating disorder clinics or substance abuse or things like that, and that's not what she was looking for. So,
and part of the reason this residential programming is so important is for the location to be proximate to where the veteran, his or her family, his or her support system live, and none of those places seem close to Maryland to me.
No, they weren't. But what we learned about going through this is some of these facilities are secluded by design, right? You don't want one right across the street here next to Union Station. That's not the best environment for some of that healing.
Because of the medical and a care reason that it is that way.
Yes.
Okay.
So, that's why when we've talked about, different access standards for the RRTPs, they should probably be thought about a little bit differently than the standard mental health, because they're designed to be away from population centers for the healing purposes. So, the same drive time and wait time standards may not be apples to apples with that same type of mental health care.
I don't want my staff to hear this, but thank you for educating me in something I didn't know. I'm sure they told me and I didn't register. Finally, in this regard, the VFW recommends that Access Act be amended to prohibit barriers to accessing community programs, and I quote, available and commonly tailored to veterans, end quote. What are you telling us?
Mostly just it's falling back to that story. We've heard from veterans who have tried to access, not just my wife, but others who have tried to access care and are denied for seemingly, arbitrary reasons. The standards are the standards. That's why we support codifying them. They've been the standard for half a dozen years. We want to make this as easily accessible to veterans as possible so there's transparency and they know. We believe that community care is a great supplement to VA care when used consistently and appropriately.
Got it. Excuse me for asking the same question of the same facts 3 times. Senator Blumenthal.
Mr. Murray, and all the members of the panel, thank you for your service. Mr. Murray, in particular, I understand that you are making a transition, and we will miss you here if, in fact, you will be going on to another chapter, but you contributed immensely, and we thank you for your service on the VFW. Just to follow up the question that you were just asked, are you or any of the others in favor of substituting community care for VA health care? In other words, privatizing the VA?
Thank you, Ranking Member Blumenthal. I think community care is VA care. VA pays for it. VA is supposed to coordinate it. It is a vital tool that the VA can use to ensure we don't have another waitlist scandal like we did in 2014 in Phoenix. There are certainly improvements to be made, I think particularly in scheduling. We hear from veterans they like the care that they receive at VA. Oftentimes it's a one-stop shop for them. They like the care they receive in the community. Oftentimes they are frustrated by the referral and scheduling process. So I think that's another reason the American Legion has supported the Access Act, because it seeks, and a couple of these bills, because it seeks to improve that particular capability of care coordination.
They're frustrated by delays in community care, just as they are in VA health care, and they should be given quicker care in both, correct?
You know, across the country, there's a common saying we've all heard, I'm sure, that you've been to one VA, you've been to one VA. There are experiences that vary. Some VAs have really good community care referral processes, others don't. Some have the ability to absorb the demand in their catchment area. Others don't and see a higher level of referrals into the community, but you're absolutely correct. There's improvements to be made in both areas, and a lot of veterans are happy with both areas.
And they should be complementary.
Absolutely.
Rather than privatizing VA health care.
It should serve as a relief valve.
Heads nodding, so I'm going to take that as a yes. Let me ask you, have any of you or your organizations met with Secretary Collins about the plan to fire 80,000 or more VA workers?
We have met with Secretary Collins. That was prior to the memo being released, but since that time, we have been in contact with the Secretary's office.
You have been in contact?
Yes, sir.
And what have you told them?
We just requested that during this review process before May, I understand that they're supposed to do their full internal review before May, publish a report in June that recommends the reduction in force by the end of the fiscal year. We absolutely wanted to have the Legionnaires' voices heard in that process to ensure that there were no cuts in mission-critical capabilities for healthcare or benefits at the VA. So we expressed our desire to provide that feedback, and we're happy to work with this committee on that issue.
Senator Blumenthal, we saw what some of the impacts for the 2,400 that were dismissed the past few weeks. We're concerned that 80-some thousand will also have impacts on care and benefits. We expressed that to the Secretary. He assured us that it won't, but we're skeptical because of what we saw already. We know that there's ways to improve this via technology, other ways to make improvements at VA, but there needs to be a plan in place first. As we heard in the first panel, they're going to develop a plan, but they already started letting people go. A plan should not be the fourth step in the process. It should probably be the first. That's what we want to see. We want to see transparency in this. We want to make sure that no decisions are being made that have unintended consequences. That's what we want to make sure of.
Ms. Haycock-Lohman?
We have not met with the Secretary yet.
You know, your Commander-in-Chief, Al Lippert, was probably the most powerful critic I've heard in his testimony and your organization in its statement. Stop the bleeding. Use a scalpel to extract the shrapnel, as was done for Mr. Lippert when he was wounded in combat. Don't cut off the arm. That's what we're seeing here. A chainsaw cutting off the arm. I'm asking both of your organizations, no matter how you talk to Secretary Collins, to be as vocal and vociferous as you possibly can be, because it is your voices and faces that will make the difference, not ours. We can be as vehement as can be, but at the end of the day, it's our veterans who have to save VA healthcare, VA benefits, the Pact Act, and I'm just telling it straight to you.
Sir, if I may follow up real quick. In our opening remarks, I wanted to highlight that our national commander released a statement that included a survey to allow Legionnaires and veterans, their families, to provide feedback on any impacts that may have occurred to them or their immediate family as a result of recent policy personnel actions. As of this morning, I think we received 4,200 approximately responses, with a response rate of 60% said no impact, and the other 40% at least had minimal impact, and we're still in the process of sifting through that data. Some of it is hard to frankly tell if it's a result of normal VA issues versus this specific issues, but we're happy to follow up with you and provide that feedback.
I would appreciate your following up. I haven't submitted my questionnaire yet as a member of the Legion, but I'll make a point of doing so. And let me just point out, these cuts are literally occurring in real time. It will be days, maybe weeks, before you see an impact. That New York Times story is capturing the initial impacts. Again, to analogize it to the combat wound suffered by Mr. Lippert, this is the point in the wound where it's just been inflicted and you have yet to see the shock, the bleeding, and the effects in real life, but they're occurring in real time. So your questionnaire may fail to adequately capture the impact, not to mention the 80,000 who haven't been fired yet. And so far as I can determine from you and from the prior testimony, there is no plan. And Mr. Murray's absolutely right. It should be plan first, fire later, not fire first and aim later, plan later. Let me ask each of you, I've described very briefly in outline form the legislation that I'm introducing, putting veterans first. I don't know whether you were here when I outlined it, but I'm going to ask for your reaction. Essentially requiring that all veterans who've been fired from their federal employment be restored to their position. All veterans, regardless of the agency. And all VA employees, whether or not they are veterans. A standard for termination in the future that involves analysis of performance, not just taking the probationary workers and firing them. A standard and a process for appeal, mental health services, respect for spouses and survivors, and restore them as well to employment. I think that will be important to your organization. Maybe you can give me some initial reaction.
Senator, we'd be happy to take a look at that when you produce a draft for that, and we'll follow up with your staff. But hopefully that'll let us know who they actually let go and what they all did, so we can start talking about who needs to come back. That's part of the unknowns right now, who the employees were, what their roles were, and what they're looking at. That would be very helpful.
I echo what Pat says. We would love to, we really do want to take a look at it, but also figuring out, if that gives us access to who was let go and what the impacts were, what agencies, that is the critical piece that we feel like we've been missing in this entire process. Is we hear numbers, but we're not seeing the exact data of what departments, what divisions, what agencies, what contracts were terminated, the things that we really need to see all of the information before making a decision on.
And I should make clear that the legislation will include military spouses and survivors.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. First of all, I love the name, Putting Veterans First, but similar, we would have to review the legislation. We are a resolution-based organization to ensure that we're aligned on that piece of legislation.
Well, I hope for your support, and equally, I hope for your constructive suggestions if you think there are ways to improve it. We're trying to be as comprehensive as possible. There are a lot of different ideas floating around, a lot of different legislation with good-sounding names. We want this to be not just good-sounding, but effective. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would just like to ask, if there's no objection, that a series of letters from some of our labor organization partners, like the Fraternal Order of Police, be submitted for the record.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Sir Blumenthal, anything else?
That's it.
I'm going to ask one more question, this time of Ms. Haycock-Lohman. A couple of questions. Thanks for the work you do. You are a surviving child yourself, and your work is important. I thank you for your help that you've provided to me and Senator Warnock in getting pieces of the Love Lives On Act across the finish line last Congress. Since its original introduction last Congress, can you talk about how many surviving spouses have come forward to speak about why this bill is needed, especially those that have previously been scared to speak out or getting remarried for fear of being penalized?
Yeah, so passage of the Dole Act really was absolutely changing the way that survivors felt comfortable speaking about their moving forward after their loss. One of the provisions in there, Section 303, basically stated that a surviving spouse was a spouse who had not remarried or held oneself out to be married, which was a very arbitrary clause that led to people turning them in for living with another person or sharing a joint bank account or having a child out of wedlock. Anyone could have just turned them in for whatever reason. And unfortunately, VA's response to that is to essentially turn off their benefits and then open an investigation where they send people into your home and your community. They interview your employer, your children's teachers, your neighbors, and tell them you're being investigated for federal fraud. And so they have so much fear about somebody turning them in for no reason, besides the fact that they were living with a new significant other. The passage of Section 303 in the Dole Act means that nobody's going to be living through these weird witch hunts ever again, and that they can at least be open about the relationship they're in while we wait to pass the rest of the Love Lives On Act and those big provisions that, we know so many more surviving spouses will choose remarriage once we pass more of the financial pieces. But we're also hearing heavily from the surviving spouses who have remarried that are trying to use the education benefits now, that they're excited to get their military ID cards back in October when that goes into effect. So already such a huge impact on the community, and they're very excited to continue to work. And I'm sure many of the congressional offices whose staff are in here have been on the receiving end of many emails about the importance of this, because we are hearing from thousands of survivors who are very active, very engaged, and are really just excited to see the rest of this move, but grateful for all of the things we've already accomplished.
Would you point out, remind the committee why there's been pushback and concern that we've heard from some that if a survivor remarries, they no longer, quote, need to receive certain benefits from the VA and DOD since their so-called contract with the government has been fulfilled. Who says those kind of things, and what's the consequence?
The pushback has primarily been from the Armed Services Committee. They seem to not agree necessarily with the amazing work you guys have done over here. That has just been, not quite sure why they feel that way, but what's the part that they're missing is that surviving spouses are military spouses first. You know, we talk so much extensively about military spouse under and unemployment as one of the biggest problems in the military community. It impacts recruitment and retention. And surviving spouses were military spouses first. And so they're making that transition. They've now lost their spouse. Many of them have young children that they have to raise. They don't have an established career. And then all of a sudden, they're starting over at 40, 45 years old after raising their children in an entry-level career. They view that military retirement as the family's retirement. Most military spouses will never vest in their own retirement, and that goes the same for surviving spouses. You know, survivor benefit plan in particular over at DOD is a purchase annuity in most cases. So this is something the family bought into, but we're breaking our promise by saying, yes, you bought this program, but we're not going to let you keep that benefit.
You heard me question the Department of Veterans Affairs officials about the slowness and then the debt collection. Anything you want me to know why that should matter, why that's a valid question?
The biggest problem that we see there is that a surviving spouse, when they remarry and turn in that paperwork, believes that if they've turned the paperwork in, they've done their due diligence. We know that survivors tend to be uneducated in their own benefits, especially if they have children in the home and there's portions that are the spouse's portion, the children's portion, it's all commingled. And so they believe if they turn in their paperwork that the VA will stop their portion of the benefits and whatever continues to be sent to them is their children's portion. They don't ask the right questions because they trust that the VA has done the right thing in that regard. And then all of a sudden they get these debt letters stating, you know, we never processed your paperwork, or it took us 2 years to process your paperwork, or you never notified us, and that they're wanting that money back. But what it really, you know, it comes down to, they trust that the VA, that if they turn their paperwork into the VA, they've done the right thing. And then they get these huge debt checks because they do go back into the queue. It's not some instant, there's not a button somebody pushes, okay, they remarried, click. It goes back into being processed, and it can take months and years. We've seen cases take 3-4 years where the survivors have had to fight to get them to turn it off. And oftentimes they don't have the money to immediately repay those benefits.
Senator Blumenthal, for your final question.
Yeah, I don't have a question. I just have a thanks, again, to each of you. I neglected, Mr. Lyle, to mention my thanks for your work on military working dogs, service dogs, which has been exemplary and very important to the committee and to me personally. We still have work to do. And Ms. Haycock-Lohman, you've been at this advocacy for quite a number of years after losing your parents, who I know are still very much in your memory, but the issue of veteran suicide still needs to be addressed, and I know you're continuing that advocacy. And again, to Mr. Murray, my thanks to you for your longstanding service. I want to thank the VA members of the previous panel who have stayed. Mr. Engelbaum, thank you for remaining. I want the record to reflect that he and Mr. Montoya and others have stayed to listen to you, and I hope that they will listen to our veterans. And again, I hope our veterans will be vocal in their advocacy. Thank you.
Senator Blumenthal, thank you. There are no other questions, so I want to once again, as Senator Blumenthal did, thank our witnesses, in this case, our second panel of witnesses, the three of you, and for our audience and their presence here as well. And it is always nice to see the VA witnesses stay to hear the next panel that follows them. And I, too, want to express my gratitude and thank you to Patrick Murray for his significant contribution to the VFW, more broadly to veterans across the country. I hold veterans, I don't know what the level you can have, but the highest regard for people who served our country. And maybe there's just a slight increase in that respect for veterans who serve other veterans. And there is absolutely no question that you and in your career and the things that you've been doing for the VFW have been hugely valuable to me and my team, but more importantly, hugely valued to your comrades in arms. And just great gratitude and best wishes as the next step occurs.
And Semper Fi.
Senator Blumenthal never. Yes, that's a good idea. I had this contest with the senator from Montana, Senator Tester, about who always got the last word in, and Senator Blumenthal unfortunately has picked up this habit. It's me.
You just gotten the last word.
All right, yes. Well, not if you keep saying that. So again, while we move to lighter things, I don't want that to take away from the seriousness of the compliment and the seriousness of the best wishes and the gratitude that was expressed by everybody in this room. You represent a very important and valuable ally for veterans and for this committee, and thank you for your service. The committee, well, let me say a few other things. I look forward to working with my colleagues and the VSO community and the VA as we try to move these bills forward. Senators who would like to submit questions for the record to today's witnesses or make an additional statement have a week to do so. And our witnesses, please, we would ask you to respond to those questions from my colleagues in a very timely manner. This is the first legislative hearing we've had in the new administration, but we've had lots of challenges over a long period of time in getting quick responses to our colleagues and to our requests from our staff. So another thing you can take to the VA, we'd appreciate timely action on the part of the department. With that, this hearing is adjourned.